The heavy brass-studded doors of the royal council chamber groaned open, and in that fractured second, the absolute authority of the British monarchy shifted violently on its axis. 4 minutes ago, an invisible guillotine had fallen. Camilla's supreme ceremonial title, the sovereign shield she had spent decades clawing through public venom, private exile, and court conspiracies to secure, had just been eradicated. Stripped by the cold, mechanized, and irrevocable order of the Shadow Council. But this brutal usurpation of power was merely the prelude to a shocking physical breaking. As the council secretary's voice echoed the final, devastating syllable of the decree, Camilla's trembling fingers desperately sought the carved mahogany spine of a chair. The polished wood slipped from her damp grip. In the suffocating, electrified silence of the chamber, her balance vanished. Her knees gave way, and she collapsed onto the floor before the very architects of her ruin, her descent a terrifying physical manifestation of a fallen regime. She did not move. She lay there while the secretary, eyes locked on the parchment, continued the unrelenting drumbeat of her destruction. Lost privileges, revoked precedents, dissolved influence. The senior figures of the realm, men and women of stone who had veiled their boiling tensions for weeks, sat in a breathless, terrifying silence. This was the Royal Council, the apex predator of palace governance, designed to amputate the crown's infected limbs, and its decree carried immediate, unquestionable force. By severing her senior title, they tore away the armor she had worn to survive. All of it passed directly, instantaneously, to Catherine. Camilla's face had remained a rigid mask of strained porcelain until the Princess of Wales was named. Then, beneath the crushing weight of those syllables, something fundamental inside the Queen Consort shattered. Charles, the sovereign, watched his wife's public annihilation in real time. Yet the king did nothing. His jaw tightened, but he sat paralyzed, trapped in a horrific paralysis. When her body hit the floor, Charles half rose, a ghost suspended in the purgatory between a husband's primal instinct and a monarch's crushing defeat. It was William who moved first. The heir's voice cut through the heavy, dead air, summoning the attendants who would peel the fallen woman from the carpet. William looked at his father's frozen posture and saw only the ashes of authority. Far from the suffocating mahogany of that chamber, Catherine remained completely unaware of the ruthless coup executed in her name. She had been deliberately kept away, a surgical separation orchestrated by the crown's fixers to protect the future queen from any whisper of conspiracy. She was not meant to look like the usurper, she was engineered to be the savior. Yet this absolute insulation meant she was walking blind into the most explosive constitutional earthquake of her life. She was not merely inheriting a ceremonial duty, she was being handed the crown's most treacherous battleground. The territory Camilla had bled to defend against public disgust and internal sabotage was now Catherine's to rule, an inheritance soaked in resentment. Back in the hushed chamber, the true danger lay untouched on the long, polished table. A sealed appendix, bound in leather and stamped with the crown's crest, rested beside the execution order. It was the lethal fine print, a venomous addendum restricting Camilla's loyal staff, suffocating her access to royal residences, and severing her hidden channels of authority. Only 3 people in the world knew the depths of its cruelty. As the room slowly cleared, William's eyes darted to the final page of the brutal document. There, glaring in the dim light, was a terrifying void. The space meant for the king's signature was empty. Charles had not signed. In the shadowy corridors of the palace, that blank space birthed the most dangerous question of the modern era. Was the king silently shielding his wife, or was the sovereign in open, desperate revolt against the machinery of his own council? To understand the anatomy of this destruction, why one woman lay broken on the floor while the other was crowned with her ruins, one must peer through the keyhole of their shared, toxic history. For years, Camilla and Catherine had occupied the same gilded balconies, smiled beneath the same flashing cameras, and projected a flawlessly engineered mirage of familial unity. But behind the velvet curtains and the closed doors, they were the avatars of 2 warring monarchies. Camilla's existence was a daily, agonizing war for survival. Her power was forged in the fires of public rejection and the terrifying paranoia that the institution merely tolerated her. Every jewel she wore, every step she took beside the king, carried crushing emotional weight, a desperately needed proof of life. To strip her of her title was not just a legal demotion, It was the Crown's brutal, final confession that she had always been an imposter, a temporary placeholder finally being evicted from the center of power. Catherine, the silent conqueror of this clandestine war, had wielded a far deadlier weapon: immaculate, unyielding restraint. The Princess of Wales had not demanded her power. She had cultivated it in the fertile, unshakable soil of public devotion and familial stability. She never openly challenged the archaic machinery of the palace. Instead, she allowed an ironclad trust to calcify around her. William had watched her silent empire expand year by year, a quiet, unbreakable partnership forged for the heavy crown that awaited them. When the news of the council's slaughter finally reached Catherine, she sat in the stillness of her private quarters, her eyes locked on the final paragraph of the decree. William stood close enough to see the genuine shock, the creeping horror blooming in her face.
"I never asked to take anything from her,"
Catherine whispered into the quiet room, struggling to separate her sworn duty from the guilt of a conqueror. The prince answered that he knew. He also knew his wife understood the agonizing tragedy of this victory, the absolute, unavoidable cruelty of receiving the keys to the kingdom at the exact second another woman was crushed beneath the weight of losing them. Yet William warned her this was not a reward. This ruthless transfer was a desperate safeguard against a constitutional crisis that threatened to burn the monarchy to the ground. The catastrophe that tore the British crown apart did not originate in a public scandal, nor was it birthed in parliamentary debate. It began weeks earlier beneath the gilded ceilings of a Windsor stateroom, a place where history is manufactured through silent, calculated gestures. During a routine rehearsal for a royal investiture, the delicate equilibrium of the palace was forever shattered. Most guests in attendance noticed nothing, hypnotized by the grand illusion of continuity. But William saw the subtle exchange of glances. Princess Anne heard the whispered, lethal commands that followed. And King Charles III watched his wife take a fateful step past a line from which there could be no retreat, marking the precise second the monarchy's hidden power struggle exploded into an uncontainable war. The roots of this insurgency were planted when Charles, strained by age and declining health, began systematically reducing his public duties. To ensure the institution's survival, the crown elevated Catherine, assigning her a commanding presence beside the heir to project stability. Yet beneath this public strategy lay a dangerous anomaly. Camilla still held absolute control over the household channels, the subterranean bureaucratic arteries through which royal invitations, security clearances, and sovereign directives flowed. To the outside world, these channels were administrative trifles. To those within the palace, they were the master key to influence, allowing one to elevate allies or erase rivals with a single stroke of a pen. The tension reached its critical mass during that Windsor rehearsal. A formal, written instruction signed by the king explicitly placed Catherine at the head of the official receiving line, a vital signal confirming her ascendancy as the public face of the realm. Camilla read the order, her eyes narrowing as the weight of her impending irrelevance washed over her. She paused, the room freezing around her, and quietly summoned a trembling senior aide. Without explanation, she ordered the staffer to strike Catherine's name from the document and rewrite the line, positioning herself above the Princess of Wales. It was a brazen, bloodless coup executed on paper, overriding the sovereign's command. William discovered the altered list moments before the rehearsal commenced. Stepping into a dimly lit side corridor, the prince confronted the Queen Consort, asking with deadly, measured calm why his father's written directive had been subverted. Camilla did not flinch, nor did she offer an apology. Instead, she turned to the future king, her eyes hardened with decades of bitterness, and delivered a sentence that severed whatever familial trust remained. Catherine needs to learn the distinction between popularity and rank. The words were an open declaration of war, exposing the toxic, suffocating terror driving Camilla's desperate bid for dominance. Princess Anne overheard enough of the confrontation to understand its terrifying implications. She sought out Charles in his private quarters, warning the king that this was no longer a trivial domestic quarrel. As documented in a classified briefing prepared after the encounter, the Princess Royal made it clear that Camilla had directly challenged the future structure of the crown itself. To erase Catherine's authorized role was to question the sovereign's command and undermine William's future reign. Moments later, a senior advisor laid 3 earlier directives before the king. Each had departed his desk with one set of instructions, only to arrive at staff offices completely altered. A terrifying pattern was laid bare. Camilla had repeatedly used her secret grip on palace channels to rewrite royal policy in the shadows. That evening, Charles summoned his wife to his private library, seeking to contain the fire before it consumed his reign. Only William and Anne were permitted to stand witness. The altered documents lay on the mahogany desk between them, undeniable proof of treason against the king's authority. When Charles asked if she had deliberately overruled him, Camilla did not deny it. Instead, she turned her rage on William, accusing the prince of exploiting his father's physical weakness to construct a shadow court around Catherine. The air in the library grew suffocating as the illusion of family unity dissolved into raw, ruthless ambition. The king, visibly shaken, demanded an immediate apology and ordered Camilla to surrender all control over the administrative channels she had weaponized. The command was soft, but its operational effect was absolute. Without those channels, Camilla would be stripped of the covert power that shielded her from her enemies within the palace walls. Camilla refused outright. Her voice rising with dramatic fury, she reminded Charles of the solemn vows he had made to her decades prior, promises to protect her honor at all costs. To surrender now, she spat, would leave her utterly powerless in her own marriage and exposed to a court that had prayed for her downfall. It was Princess Anne who delivered the final blow. Breaking her silence, she revealed that she had already initiated a formal council review. Palace staff, Anne reported, were living in terror, paralyzed by fear of retaliation if they obeyed the king's official commands over Camilla's secret counter-orders. The institution was hemorrhaging trust from within. Camilla pushed her chair back, the harsh scrape of wood against marble shattering the silence. She glaringly warned Charles that allowing the review to proceed would publicly destroy every promise he had ever made to her, before storming out and slamming the heavy door behind her, leaving the king stranded in the ruins of his reign. The council chamber was transformed into an arena of quiet, ruthless judgment. Standing before the long mahogany table, King Charles III stared at the cold parchment that demanded his wife's complete ruin. Beside him, Prince William and Princess Anne stood like silent sentinels of an unyielding future, their expressions frozen in solemn severity. The king removed his spectacles, his hand trembling as he confronted the tragic climax of his reign. "Approving this," Charles murmured, his voice hollow with grief, "feels like publicly declaring my entire marriage a failure." Princess Anne did not offer comfort. Her response was cold, precise, and devoid of sentiment. "Protecting Camilla from shame, Charles, cannot require Catherine, terrified staff members, or the future of this crown to endure constant sabotage." Then Prince William stepped forward, reaching for the black leather folder containing the sealed appendix. He opened it, laying the final, indisputable proof of treason before his father. A series of suppressed intelligence files and delayed security briefings. Among them was an urgent dossier regarding an upcoming international summit, a high-stakes state event where Catherine had been deliberately deprived of protocol updates, left to walk out before foreign sovereigns completely unprepared. It was an act of cold, calculated ambush designed to orchestrate the future queen's public humiliation. Silence descended upon the chamber, heavy and suffocating. Charles stared at the evidence, his last defenses collapsing beneath the weight of truth. Driven by a desperate remnant of husbandly affection, the king begged the council for one final night, a 24-hour reprieve to convince Camilla to surrender her titles voluntarily, offering her the illusion of a graceful, negotiated exit. When Charles entered Camilla's private apartments bearing the surrender terms, he offered her everything he could still salvage: a protected private title, retained personal staff, and a joint public statement framing her retreat as a noble sacrifice. But to Camilla, surrender was indistinguishable from absolute death. Standing in the pale light of dawn, her hands shaking with suppressed rage, she read the proposal. "Do you truly expect me to sign away the life you swore to defend?" she spat, her voice cracking under the terror of her impending erasure. Charles remained silent, unable to offer another lie. Driven past the brink of desperation, Camilla tore the unsigned decree in two, scattering the pieces across the floor. "I will not give them the satisfaction of my surrender," she whispered to her secretary, her voice trembling even as her eyes burned with defiance. By morning, the council acted with terrifying, mechanical finality. The recommendation was converted into an absolute order, stripping her of authority in a single stroke. The ultimate shift in the realm's balance of power took place not in the council chamber, but behind the closed doors of Catherine's private drawing room. For the first time since the coup, the two women stood face to face, stripped of advisors, spin doctors, and royal security. Camilla entered like a ghost haunting her own execution. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, yet her posture remained stiff with defiant malice. Catherine sat composed, her hands folded tightly, masking an agonizing conflict between duty and empathy. Between them on the low table rested the leather-bound decree of transfer. Camilla stared at her rival, her voice a cold, raspy whisper that cut through the silence. "Did you know? Did you orchestrate this vote from the shadows?" Catherine met her gaze without flinching, her eyes filled with profound sadness. "I knew nothing," Catherine replied, her voice steady and clear. "I never sought your downfall, Camilla. I never asked for your title." A bitter, hollow laugh escaped Camilla's lips, a sudden, violent crack in her formidable armor. For the first time, the naked truth spilled into the open. "Your popularity terrified me," Camilla confessed, her voice trembling with raw vulnerability. "I watched the public fall in love with you. I watched Charles fade, and I saw myself becoming invisible before his reign even took root. Every directive I altered, every briefing I delayed, it was the only way I could prove I still had power inside these walls." The confession hung in the air, heavy with tragedy. Justice had triumphed, but it was devoid of joy. Slowly, with a trembling hand, Camilla placed her palm on the transfer document and pushed it across the table toward Catherine. "Take it," she whispered, her authority utterly destroyed. "But never confuse a title with security. It gives you rank, but it will never quiet the fear." Catherine placed her hand over the parchment, accepting the heavy mantle. "This is not a victory," Catherine said softly. "It is a burden." In that dark, silent room, the balance of power shifted forever. By nightfall, the invisible seismic shockwave that had shattered the inner sanctum of the palace breached the ancient stone walls, consuming the nation in a frenzy of breaking news. Televised broadcasts were interrupted, regular programming suspended, and dense crowds swelled beneath the iron gates of Buckingham Palace. The official royal bulletin was characteristically austere, a cold, calculated paragraph confirming that Camilla's senior title and ceremonial duties had been transferred to Catherine with immediate effect. It omitted any mention of the altered directives, the delayed intelligence dossiers, or the weeping staff members who had suffered under the Queen Consort's shadow reign. To the public, it appeared as a sudden, mysterious changing of the guard. But to those who understood the mechanics of royal power, it was a bloodless execution, public and absolute. When Catherine made her first public appearance the following morning, there was no victory parade, no sparkling diamonds, no triumphant smiles. Stepping from her state car into the glare of flashing cameras, she wore a dark, understated coat, her posture rigid with solemn gravity. Before facing the press, she had deliberately removed a prominent ceremonial brooch, a silent, calculated gesture signaling that she would not parade her rival's skin as a trophy. Standing before the microphones, Catherine read a brief, carefully calibrated statement. She paid formal tribute to Camilla's years of public service, promising continuity, restraint, and unwavering dedication to the crown. Her words were measured, but her eyes betrayed the fatalistic truth. She was no longer merely a beloved princess. She was now the unyielding backbone of a fragile dynasty, carrying a mantle forged in betrayal and heavy with the sins of the institution. In the secluded wings of the royal estate, Camilla woke to a new, terrifying reality. The machinery of state had stripped her away with terrifying efficiency. Within hours, her official letterheads were shredded, her dedicated security detail reallocated, and the door to her administrative office locked and rebranded under Catherine's household. The throne room, the state banquets, the secret council meetings, all were now closed to her forever. Deprived of her senior title, she was reduced to a quiet, peripheral figure, a ghost wandering the echoing corridors of a court that had finally succeeded in erasing her. Her life's work, her decades of enduring public hatred to earn a seat beside the king, had been dismantled in a single morning. She had fought the institution for half a century, only to learn its most lethal lesson. The crown tolerates individuals, but it belongs to no one. For King Charles III, the victory of preserving his throne offered no solace. The king sat alone in his private study, gazing out over the mist-shrouded gardens, surrounded by the quiet ruins of his personal life. He had fulfilled his sacred oath to protect the monarchy, but the cost had been his soul. Though he and Camilla remained married, the trust that had sustained them through decades of scandal was utterly shattered. Their private conversations were now guarded, weighed down by the unspoken knowledge that when forced to choose between his wife and his crown, the king had let the guillotine fall. He had saved the realm, but in doing so, he had doomed the only woman he had ever truly loved to a lifetime of silent, humiliated exile. The royal council wasted no time in cementing the new order. Bureaucratic loopholes were permanently sealed, administrative reporting lines were restructured, and severe constitutional safeguards were enacted to ensure no secret household channel could ever again countermand the sovereign's written orders. Prince William and Catherine stood at the pinnacle of this reordered world, their dominance absolute, their future secure. Yet there was no joy in their triumph. They had witnessed firsthand the terrifying, cold-blooded brutality required to preserve the throne, a lesson that would forever govern their own approaching reign. History teaches us that the British crown is not a monument to individual glory, but an insatiable, immortal machine. It demands absolute obedience, consuming kings, queens, and consorts alike to preserve its own unbroken continuity. Dynasties rise and fall, human hearts shatter in the dark, but the throne remains, cold, indifferent, and absolute. If you found this dramatic deep dive into the monarchy's hidden power struggle compelling, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more breaking reports from behind palace doors.